In the records of British royal history, few deaths have proven as gruesome, as pitiful, or as completely stripped of dignity as that of King George IV. When he finally breathed his last on June 26, 1830, the man once hailed as the first gentleman of England had been reduced to a grotesque parody of monarchy, a swollen, rotting mountain of flesh that repulsed even the servants who tended him. This is the tale of a king who perished not as a living cadaver, forsaken by his subjects and condemned by history itself. The journey from dashing young prince to despised ruler had unfolded over decades, yet the plunge into utter physical and moral ruin gathered terrifying speed in his closing years. What follows is not simply the death of a monarch, but the total collapse of a human being, a warning carved in excess, witnessed by those forced to endure the nightmare of George IV's final days. Born George Augustus Frederick on August 12, 1762, as the eldest son of George III and Queen Charlotte, the young prince enjoyed every privilege royal blood could offer. He possessed sharp intelligence, effortless charm, and looks so striking that fashionable society worshipped him. Yet even in youth, the roots of his later ruin were quietly taking hold. His father, the stern and devout George III, enforced a joyless court that prized moral severity above everything, an atmosphere the prince found suffocating beyond endurance. By age 21, George had set up his own establishment at Carlton House on Pall Mall, launching what would become a lifelong campaign of calculated self-annihilation. The difference between father and son could scarcely have been greater. Where George III embodied thrift and discipline, his heir plunged headlong into every imaginable indulgence. He gathered a circle of debauched friends, swallowed heroic amounts of liquor, and conducted a string of affairs that kept the scandal sheets in constant delight. The 1780s saw the handsome prince begin his slide into something far darker. His gluttony grew infamous. A normal breakfast might include 2 pigeons, 3 beefsteaks, 3/4 of a bottle of white wine, a glass of dry champagne, 2 glasses of port, and a glass of brandy. And that was only the start. Lunches and dinners that followed resembled Roman imperial feasts more than ordinary meals. As his girth exploded, so did his debts. By the 1790s he owed fortunes to every major London tradesman and moneylender. Parliament rescued him again and again, but each bailout merely fueled the next round of extravagance. Restraint seemed beyond him. He treated money as an infinite resource created solely for his gratification. His outlay on clothing, furnishings, art, and pleasure reached sums that stunned even the most profligate aristocrats. His private life proved no less ruinous. The secret, illegal marriage to the Catholic widow Maria Fitzherbert in 1785 triggered a constitutional storm. His later official marriage to Caroline of Brunswick in 1795 became perhaps the most catastrophic royal union in British history. At their first meeting George, repelled, demanded brandy. Caroline remarked that he was very fat and nothing like his portrait. Their wedding night, he was discovered drunk and unconscious in the fireplace, set the pattern for a marriage that scandalized Europe. Their mutual loathing fed endless public amusement, with newspapers and caricaturists chronicling every sordid episode of their estrangement. George's later treatment of Caroline, whom he tried to divorce once king, revealed cruelty that went far beyond ordinary marital hatred. He barred her from court, struck her name from the liturgy, and even tried to stop her attending his coronation. When she died suddenly in 1821, many believed the strain of his persecution had killed her. Through all these years of scandal and overindulgence, George's body began paying the inevitable price. By 1797, aged 35, he already tipped the scales at 245 pounds, an immense weight for the period. The face once judged England's handsomest grew puffy and distorted. Multiple chins appeared that no cravat could hide, while his once athletic figure vanished under rolling layers of fat that made walking painful. Yet vanity survived intact. He mobilized armies of tailors, corset makers, and cosmeticians to preserve the illusion of his lost beauty. His corsets became feats of engineering, a bastille of whalebone, one witness called them, designed to squash his vast belly into something vaguely human. Huge wigs concealed thinning hair, thick rouge and powder masked his sickly pallor, and ever more flamboyant clothes distracted from the ruin beneath. When George III descended into permanent madness in 1810, his eldest son became Prince Regent, exercising full royal authority while his father lingered in derangement and solitude. The Regency era, lasting until 1820, ought to have been the crowning triumph of the prince's life. Instead, it accelerated his descent from merely dissipated royal to something infinitely more pathetic and sinister. As regent, George enjoyed almost unlimited power to mold Britain in his image. He commissioned breathtaking buildings, patronized the arts on a Renaissance scale, and presided over London's most dazzling social seasons. Yet beneath the glittering surface a darkness deepened that would soon swallow him whole. His drinking reached levels that appalled even Georgian hard drinkers, while addiction to laudanum began leaving him insensible for days. The regent's banquets turned into grotesque orgies of consumption that shocked foreign guests. In one 6-week spell in 1816, Carlton House received over £5,000 of meat alone, excluding sausages, pork, or poultry. The prince devoured quantities no normal stomach could hold, washing it all down with oceans of wine and spirits that left him stupefied. Dinner parties stretched from mid-afternoon until sunrise, guests often fleeing in disgust at their host's behavior. By 1820, when he finally became George IV, he was already an object of ridicule rather than reverence. His coronation, costing almost £1 million, was condemned as maniacal vanity. The new king waddled beneath a crown studded with 12,000 rented diamonds, his colossal frame crammed into silver tissue robes. One witness said he looked like a magnificent whale dressed for a masquerade. The early years of the reign were dominated by political crises that exposed his total unfitness to rule. The attempted divorce of Queen Caroline turned into a national circus that swung public opinion decisively against him. His meddling in policy revealed a grasp of government both childish and dangerous. Parliament simply bypassed him, reducing the monarch to a ceremonial puppet whose main duty was not to create fresh scandal. Through the 1820s his body collapsed at terrifying speed. He passed 280 pounds, one of the fattest men in Britain. Fluid-swollen legs made walking agony. Stairs became impossible, servants had to haul him through his palaces like an enormous item of furniture. The gulf between his public dignity and private invalidism drove him into deeper isolation and drug dependence. Laudanum consumption soared to lethal levels. He took over 100 drops before appearances, enough to fell most men, leaving him in a permanent fog, able to concentrate on state business for only minutes. Speeches turned into rambling nonsense that mortified ministers and delighted opponents. Foreign envoys reported that the King of England seemed permanently drunk or drugged. In the late 1820s his eyesight failed catastrophically, like his father before him. Severe cataracts left him almost blind. A primitive operation in 1829 helped little. By late 1828 he could no longer sign his name. Parliament authorized a stamp of his signature. The man once proud of his elegant handwriting could not even write George R. Gout ravaged him with special ferocity. Hands and feet swelled until the lightest touch provoked screams. He wore specially made slippers for his grotesquely enlarged feet and could no longer grip a pen or fork. The king, once famed for graceful gestures, was fed like a baby by servants who struggled to hide their disgust. Those who saw him regularly were still shocked by the speed of his transformation. Sir David Wilkie, painting him in 1829, wrote that the king wasted frightfully day by day despite his bulk. He called the sittings melancholy business and likened George to a great sausage stuffed into its skin. Even Wilkie's flattering portrait could not hide that the subject had stopped looking human. Breathing grew ever more difficult as fat crushed lungs and heart. He could no longer lie flat, suffocation threatened. Instead he slept bolt upright in a custom chair, head propped on one hand, surrounded by pillows. Even this brought little rest. Coughing fits and gasping woke him constantly, driving him to yet more laudanum. His once admired skin became a nightmare, stretched to breaking point, folded into uncleanable crevices that festered with sores. His face turned corpse gray. Servants said touching his flesh felt like pressing raw dough, soft, clammy, somehow unclean. The stench that rolled off him became legendary. Despite valets and doctors doing their best, his size made proper washing impossible. Infected sores, sweat-trapped folds, and medication combined into an odor so foul that staff gagged entering the room. Visitors at Windsor could smell the king rooms away, as if decomposition had started early. His eating, always monstrous, grew still more grotesque. Medications dulled taste, so he demanded ever richer, spicier dishes, yet ate mountainous portions even while clearly suffering. The sight of the dying king cramming food while fighting for breath became one of the most pitiful spectacles the household ever witnessed. Psychologically, the ruin was perhaps worse than the physical. A man obsessed with appearance was forced to watch himself become a caricature. On his own orders, mirrors vanished from his rooms. He could not bear his reflection. The dandy who once spent hours at his toilet now refused to look at himself. Paranoia and despair deepened. He became certain servants mocked him, often correctly, and would rage, then weep for hours. Drug-fueled mood swings made him impossible. Even loyal retainers dreaded their turns of duty. He almost never left his apartments. When he did, it was in a reinforced wheelchair built for his weight. The darling of London society now lived like a prisoner, cut off by shame and incapacity. His doctors became targets of abuse. He sacked any who told the truth, keeping only those who fed him comforting lies about possible recovery. When confronted with reality, he lashed out at the messenger. Government grew alarmed at having a drug-addicted, half-blind, barely coherent monarch. Ministers quietly prepared for the day he might linger alive yet wholly incapacitated. Despite palace secrecy, the public learned the truth. Caricaturists who had mocked his fat for years now drew a king already dead on his throne. Official bulletins spoke of indisposition. Everyone knew they lied. Servants lost all respect. Footmen grumbled openly about carrying the mountain. Maids gossiped about the stench. Royal protocol crumbled. His sleep was shattered. He dozed by day, stayed awake screaming in pain by night, insisting someone sit with him while he raved under laudanum. Alcohol consumption remained heroic. Mixtures that would kill ordinary men merely made him louder and less coherent. By 1829 he could no longer read, sign papers, or follow discussion. The government functioned around a living corpse that occasionally barked ignored orders. Moving him required teams of men and special apparatus. The creaking, grunting, and wheezing echoed through corridors as a constant reminder of monarchy's decay. Hygiene became impossible. Weeks passed without a proper wash. The smell grew worse. Visitors breathed through their mouths. Official portraits still showed a noble king. Those who saw the reality spoke of something scarcely human. The gap felt surreal. Laudanum made his mind treacherous, lucid 1 hour, unable to recognize his valet the next. Memory failed. He raged when reminded. In his last months a sudden religious terror seized him. The lifelong sinner now begged clergymen to hear marathon confessions so lurid they left the priests shaken. Laudanum doses reached suicidal levels. Doctors secretly diluted it, but he demanded more. Eating became pure compulsion. He forced down vast meals he could no longer digest. Old friends and his last mistress drifted away, unable to bear the sight and smell. He died surrounded only by paid, revolted staff. The stench drove even Queen Adelaide to different rooms. Servants tied cloths over their faces. Delusions flourished. He claimed to have led the charge at Waterloo. Grandiose fantasy alternated with suicidal despair. Pain became constant and unbearable. Screams rang through the castle at night. Protocol collapsed completely. Servants openly called him disgusting. He clung to life in blind panic, begging for any treatment that might buy another day. Bowel function failed. Blockages lasted days, then burst in bloody, ominous floods. Ministers prepared William's accession while George still breathed. Few hid their relief. His last weeks were spent in the upright chair, head on hand, wheezing. On the night of June 25, 1830, breathing worsened dramatically. His skin turned corpse gray. He sent his physician away, settled into the chair, and held the hand of the one man still willing to stay, his eye surgeon Sir William Waller. At about 3 a.m. on June 26 he woke in final crisis, suffering a massive internal hemorrhage. His last words were either "this is death" or simply bewildered groaning. He died at 3:15 a.m., head slumping onto his page's shoulder as the tortured breathing stopped. Autopsy revealed organs drowned and crushed by fat, a ruptured stomach vessel, and a liver destroyed by alcohol. London heard the news with relief, not grief. The Times wrote the most savage royal obituary in history. There never was an individual less regretted by his fellow creatures than this deceased king. Even the coffin had to be specially reinforced. The corpse still stank. The lying-in state drew curiosity-seekers more than mourners. At the funeral, courtiers cracked jokes. William IV could barely hide his eagerness. No one pretended sorrow. Wellington summed up the universal verdict: the most selfish, false, ill-natured men he had ever met, without one redeeming quality. History remembers George IV as a disaster for the monarchy, a warning in flesh of what absolute indulgence can do to both a man and a monarchy.